Hello, everybody. Welcome to an unusual Anthony Peak's Consciousness Hour and InCon, in that I'm wearing a hat. And the reason I'm wearing a hat is quite peculiar because it kind of links in, I think, in some way with the topic of today. Yesterday, my father-in-law is moving house, and myself and my wife have inherited some antiques that he has no longer got space for. And I was deciding, we've got this beautiful antique barometer from about the 1870s, and we decided we would put it up in our conservatory, but we weren't sure where to put it. So I decided that we would probably move one of the prints we've got in there, which is an interesting print by Paul Klee, which is a very interesting one about cameras, which is quite intriguing in itself. But when I was taking the picture off, I was standing on a chair, and I lifted the picture off, and as I did, I actually moved a circular clock that was hanging on the wall. I moved it and it came on, it crashed down on the top of my head down here, okay, and knocked me off the chair, which I managed to catch the clock and managed to land okay. And I was thinking, this is somewhat ironic and somewhat synchronistic, literally synchronistic in the terms of time, because here we are today talking about precognition, time, and time perception. And of course, I get hit by time. So it's rather like, I'm a time-addled man today. But I decided that I'd actually wear my classic Bryce Canyon cap, purely and simply because I don't want people to be so fascinated by the scab on the top of my head that they won't listen to our guest today, which is the very wonderful Gary Lachman. Now, you guys will know that I think I've interviewed Gary at least 3 or 4 times, and Gary and I have met on a number of occasions. And whenever we meet up, we just get talking. And it's a classic example of this. When Gary joined us before as we were starting, we'd forgotten we were doing a video even, or a program, because we just started chatting about the most obscure things, and we were off crazy talking about things, and we'd forgotten almost about the show we were going to be doing. But today what we're going to be doing is talking about Gary's fantastic new book, which we will talk about in detail. And I thought I had the cover with me down here of the article Gary had written in 14 times, but I've obviously left it upstairs in my adult state. But get the opportunity with the latest edition of 14 times and read Gary's article, because it's absolutely intriguing. And he talks about time. He talks about so many subjects that I'm incredibly interested in. And as many of you will know, that a few years ago I wrote this book here, The Labyrinth of Time, on the illusion of past, present, and future. And you can see the overlap between Gary and I's interests. And I always think whenever Gary and I meet that we've almost lived parallel lives, because our interests from Colin Wilson onwards, it's just uncanny the areas that we've overlapped in the things we've been interested in. And we keep meeting up and chatting about ideas and working together on things and everything. So maybe this will be the start of something, for the future after we get through COVID. So without further ado, welcome Gary to InCon.
Well, thank you very much for having me on this afternoon. And I just wanted to ask, what time was it when the clock hit you? And was it the actual time? Was the time the right time? Was it an old clock and it just was set whatever time it was?
No, it was the right time. I think.
Remember what time it was?
Oh, was it 11:11?
Wouldn't that have been extraordinary? Wouldn't that have been the ultimate ingrained synchronicity? I should have checked that, but I was in a state of shock for a few minutes. But really, that was a missed opportunity, wasn't it?
Well, in a way, it was ahead of time, but we can go down that route quite a bit. But no, I mean, that's sort of the story that one would put in to a book about these sorts of things. And what I found, and I'm sure you have as well, and Sarah and other people that look into these sorts of strange coincidences or synchronicities, as Jung called them, is that the more you kind of think about them and read up about them, they sort of happen. Arthur Kessler, who no one reads these days really, but they should, and he was a writer in the 20th century, and he wrote quite a bit in his last years about parapsychology and things of that sort. And he talked about sort of a coincidence meteor shower hitting him when he was writing his book about the roots of coincidence and all that sort of thing. So, I mean, we all hear these stories and everyone has them. But when you start thinking about them, they are quite strange.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because one of the things that you're probably aware of is that my book on J.B. Priestley, I've been fascinated by J.B. Priestley. And of course, you and I met Luke Dodson, J.B. Priestley's great grandson, a few years ago. I had a wonderful chat about things. But Priestley's book, Man and Time, which you reference in your book, was also a great influence on myself. And I have cited the incredible coincidence that took place with Man and Time when Priestley quoted Coleman, and particularly he quoted a book that had been published in 1958 called Relativity for the Layman. And Priestley wanted to get across the idea about the way in which when you look at stars, you're looking at them as they were hundreds or thousands of years ago. And he cites the example of Betelgeuse and the distance of Betelgeuse in Orion. And he then quotes, he has a box section and he quotes the Coleman book. And Coleman describes and says, imagine that there's a blowout on the star Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse on the night of, I think it was the 18th of March 2000. Now, as you know, Priestley wrote that book or it was published in 1963 or 64. But the interesting thing was, I was lying in bed reading it, and there was a whole series of coincidences why that I hadn't read that book for ages. I'd ordered it; it wasn't even my own copy, and I got it from the local library, ordered it from Boston Spa, from the British Library. So there's all these kind of chance meetings as to when I started reading the book. I then took it upstairs and I flicked through the pages at random. And I came across that page and started reading it. And as I read down, it said, imagine the star breakout on the night of the 18th of March 2000. And I turned around to my wife and I said, what year is it? And she said, it's 2000. And I said, what month is it? And she looked at me as if I'm completely mad, as she always does, and said, it's March. And then I said, what day is it? And she said, the 18th of March. And I said, what time of day is it? She said, the evening. I said, what's the chance of me reading a page at random from a book at random that gives the exact date and time of day of when I'm reading it? And that stunned me.
Yeah.
So let's go on. What stimulated you to write this book? What was it that you decided? Because you're such a prolific author. You're bringing out books all the time. I can never keep.
Well, I mean, the main thing is, as I sort of invert the old adage, necessity is the mother of production. So as I make a living writing my books. I mean, I've a little humor there, but no, this particular one is that back in 2019, I gave a talk at the Brompton Cemetery on hypnagogia, the in-between liminal state, between sleeping and waking. And this was part of something called the Borderlands of Sleep. It was a series of different talks having to do with sleep and dreaming, put on by a group here called Curious Invitation. I've done quite a few talks with them. And tagging on to my talk about hypnagogia, and I go through, different people and who wrote about it. And there's a great deal of it was about Andreas Mavromatis, a mutual friend and acquaintance who wrote the book. I would think it's still the standard book, everything you ever wanted to know about hypnagogia. So more or less, about that. And at the end, I just tagged on a bit about precognitive dreams, just because even in hypnagogia itself is a state that seems partial to a variety of paranormal sorts of stuff. But precognition is one of the ones. And so I tagged on some stuff about J.W. Dunn, wrote his famous book, Experiment with Time. And actually, he experimented with hypnagogia and to determine whether he was dreaming the future. And he said, yes, indeed, he was. Well, I sort of gave the cat away with that, saying Dunn's book is about how he discovered that he dreamed the future. And so I talked about that, and then Priestley's stuff, and then T.C. Lethbridge, who not too many people know, but he was a Cambridge sort of archaeologist, the keeper of, I think, Anglo-Saxon stuff at the Cambridge. In later life, he became very interested in the paranormal and parapsychology. And one of the last things he did was write a book about dreams, or he discovered as well that he dreamed the future. And when I say he dreamed the future, it's not like, lo and behold, I predict. It's nothing like that. It isn't sort of you're raised up above some vast temporal, landscape horizon, and you can see lots of stuff. No, you see your own future. You see what you are going to see or what's going to come to you down the line. And so Dunn, he said, it was as if it was a film, but I was seeing, it had been cut up and spliced in a strange way. So events in the future started happening before they should have in his dreams. So, and then I added at the end of it that I discovered that I did this too. And I discovered it just by following Dunn's advice, where he said, just write down your dreams, pay attention to what happens during the day and compare the two, and bits and pieces of the future. So I have to emphasize it's bits and pieces. It isn't predicting, it isn't prophecy. We all know lots of stories of people having dreams of premonition or something happening to a relative, and all those are the dramatic ones that get the most attention. And in my book, I talk about some of those, but what I'm talking about is that you don't know you've dreamed the future unless you write the dream down, and then that day or tomorrow or next week, it's like, this was in that dream. And so that was the end of the talk. And the next day when I went on to Twitter, the first thing I saw was a post from someone who had been at the talk. And she said, OMG, exclamation point. It's true. And I dreamt that I picked up a hedgehog from the road and put it on the pavement. And the first thing I saw in my Twitter feed was a post about how to protect the hedgehogs. And I said, well, bingo. And what that is that's an example of what I call symbolic distortion, because often, not always, but often the precognitive element or stuff is slightly, changed, because dreams speak in a symbolic language. Although more often than not, it's an exact copy of what's going to happen. And I said, well, that's great. Somebody else, unless it was a prank, I'm assuming it wasn't, but somebody corroborated that. And so I thought, I've been having these dreams for 40 years. I started reporting them in 1980. And I've mentioned them here and there in some of my books and footnotes. And I did an article a long time ago for a magazine in the States called Quest about it. But I thought, maybe I should just pull this together and into a book. I've certainly got enough material to do that. And so I talked to my publisher and they liked the idea. So over the first lockdown in spring 2020, I pulled out all these old dream journals, a stack like that, tried to read as much as I can with the faded ink in the spidery scrawl and going back. And even one of the dreams I came across from 1998, in it, someone tells me, stay at home. There's no reason to go out. Stay at home where it's safe. And that's exactly what everyone was hearing on all the media and during the first lockdown. That was
so you heard a voice. So this was
no. I'm saying, in the dream, someone tells me to do that. I just was reading through all these dreams, and it was like, oh, hold on. I must have heard it 20 times that day, wow. That message, and then there it was. So I don't necessarily count that precognitive, but I would say that's kind of in the synchronicity department where, in a dream from 1998 that I come across while searching for any precognitive dreams, because many of them I checked off over the years, okay, precog, with some of them, So while looking for precognitive dreams, I come across a dream during which someone tells me the same message that I'm hearing on the radio or the television, wherever, that day, and during this whole time, during the, the first lockdown. So that was a strange one. So it's just, I just, I don't, let's move on. So that was the reason why I did it. So I just pulled them all together. Then it's like, well, I guess the theme of the book is sort of like two different mysteries. There's the mystery of dreams, the mystery of time. And they come together in the precognitive sort of dreams, and so that's kind of the base. But then I sort of look into the mystery of time, and then there's temporal displacements, we can call them to sound scientific, that happen in the waking state as well. And then I also it's a gradient for me. So you have these sorts of experiences, but also say something like when I was writing my book about Madame Blavatsky, I spent a great deal of time reading about Tibet. And then at the end of the day, when I would go out for a walk, suddenly I think, where am I? I'm walking around, West Hampstead here, but I was, I was somewhere near the Tashi Lumpo monastery for 6 hours today. So it was like I had traveled there in my mind. Physically, I was, here in North London, but in my imagination, I had traveled there. And it seemed to me, if that kind of effect, which is the same effect as I remember when I was a kid, long ago, when they used to have real movie theaters and matinees in the afternoon, you'd go in and you watch 2 films and you come out, whatever, 3-4 hours later. And it's like, it's like, oh, you were wherever you were, I was in a Western, or I was in outer space or something. And then you're back, smack dab in small town, wherever it is. So it's that kind of displacement, which we would say, oh, well, that was your imagination, but that's a gradient into, I would say, well, if you push that a little further, isn't that what we call remote viewing now, or something like that? So I use the dream, the precognitive dream. It's like, well, this happened. I mean, I have no idea how they happen, and I'm not really interested in how they happen. I know they do. I mean, and I just wonder, well, what does that mean about the world that we live in? What does that tell us that these sorts of things happen? And when you get onto synchronicities, they're even stranger, I would say, because the synchronicities are very personal. Whereas the precognitive dreams are too, but sometimes it's just like, it's the only thing interesting about the dream is that it's precognitive. If it wasn't, the only person who'd be interested would be a therapist, But, when you have these synchronicities, it seems like there's some intelligence somehow has arranged matters in order to give you a precise message, I mean, I'll stop in a minute, but just to give one example is when, and recently, I mean, again, before COVID came, I was on my way here from where I lived to give a talk at the Theosophical Society over near Baker Street. It's not a far walk, so I was going to walk, and on the way I realized I needed something, so I stopped in the local market here. And when I was in the queue to make my purchase, and I was on my way to give a talk about Colin Wilson and about The Outsider, his book The Outsider, and all of that stuff, So as I was in the queue waiting to make my purchase, I looked over on the magazine rack, and they have the magazine stacked there. And on Vogue, the only thing I could see on Vogue was the thin strip, because there's magazines in front of it and all that. And the only thing I could see was the title of a lead article, and it was The Outsider. So I later discovered it had something to do with a singer named Billie Eilish. I don't know anything about it. I'm completely ignorant of anything of that. But I thought, okay. And I had to go. So on my way to get, and I came back and I realized, actually, I need something else. And I went in, and I actually had forgot about the synchronicity. And I thought, oh yeah, oh God, let me go see I can see what this outsider business was on the magazine now. And I went there and it was gone. They had changed all the issues. So the new issues with it. So had I not gone in for whatever it was, I would not have seen The Outsider on my way to talk about The Outsider. And so it's like, you could talk about your positrons all night, but who knew I was on my way to talk about The Outsider? I mean, I'm sorry, I mean, it sounds mad, but that's just what it's like.
This is the thing with synchronicities, isn't it? The way you look for the joke, because sometimes, there's a joke in there, and it'll sometimes hit you later. I mean, for instance, the synchronicity even here is that we only arranged this particular interview a few days ago, and I saw the article and I contacted you. But what is interesting is I was supposed to have another guest on, but we couldn't make it for that guest, and we slotted you in quickly because the article of the new book. But next week's guest on the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour is Colin Stanley.
Oh, really?
Colin Stanley, you and I both know. He's he's a major guy involved in the Colin Wilson Society, and you go, woo! So we got Colin Wilson, we've got The Outsider, we've got people on my Facebook wall talking about The Outsider as well, and I'll guarantee that The Outsider will now come up again and again. But of course, just putting the skeptic's hat on here, we could argue, and I'd be interested to your point of view on this, that you could argue that this is very much attention bias, confirmation bias, that in many ways, we when we are attuned to looking for these coincidences, we see them purely and simply because we're in information overload, and we're always scanning the environment. So therefore we will zone in on the things that have significance for us. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, doesn't convince me. No. Somebody taps me. I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't know. I tend to think of it as a guardian angel effect. It's kind of like you're on your way, okay. But it's a joke. And that would lead it to dreams, because dreams have a sense of humor too. I mean, they're very funny. This was something that the Egyptians even recorded. And Freud talks about it, whatever, 2,000, however many thousand years later. Although, grant you, what was funny to an Egyptian wouldn't necessarily be funny to us today. But we might try that, the Egyptian book of dream humor. I don't know. But that was the thing. It communicates in puns, plays on words, and humor. And often the humor is sugar on a pill that one needs to swallow, a bit of self-knowledge that might go down a bit with more difficulty without that. But I mean, let's say I'm not trying to explain it. That's the thing. I don't care. I have no interest in explaining it. It's like, explain a sunset to me, and it's like, yeah. I mean, but I can understand, as there's an itch to do that. And in fact, one of the books I read during the time when I was doing the research was this very interesting book called Time Loops by Eric Wargo, who I've not met, and we've sort of tweeted a little. And it was recommended to me by a fellow named Jeffrey Kripal in the States, who writes about this sort of stuff, but also in kind of academic way and with spirituality generally. But he's written about UFO experiences and anomalies and that kind of thing. So, and then Dean Radin, who's one of the leading scientists working on parapsychological and precognition, especially, he mentioned it. So yeah, it was after I did a seminar with Dean Radin and Alex Gray at the Mega Studios in upstate New York. Again, late 2000, I guess it must have been late 2019. Before everything shut down, and we talked about all this, and I mentioned in the book that I was at this thing with him. But after that, I was in Montreal for a week, and I spent the week reading Eric Wargo's book, and it's a very intricate, ambitious, in many ways ingenious attempt to sort of explain it in a physicalist, materialist way, but I had to say I was scratching my head about it, because I'm certainly not clever enough to follow half of it, but it's Minkowski's block universe. But then he's bringing in Jacques Lacan, who I have to say is not the clearest person in the first place to try to make any sense what he's talking about. And then operant conditioning, and somehow my brain in the future rewards me with the precognitive event, and I'm not saying it's not true. I haven't the slightest idea whether it's true or not. It doesn't help me that in any way with my, the phenomenological experience of precognition is what I'm more interested in. This happens, and it might not be the same in every person. I know myself, because my dream life is, I think we all have. We all follow, because we're humans and our brains are the same and all that, so we all follow certain patterns. But I think obviously our lives are different, and a variety of different factors, affect your dream life. But I know when I say in the book, I go through times when it's just very, very lively. They're long, go on forever. When you're in therapists, they love those, because they keep coming back with the same dream for a long time. But then there's other times when it's like very sparse, nothing happens, and you get like, okay, it's like, because if they're compensatory or compensatory, I don't know how the Brits pronounce that. These spare, nothing much happening dreams, one would think are supposed to be compensating for, an overrich, overactive life. And let me tell you, it ain't like that. so they're not. I don't know if they're compensating for anything. So I'm saying they have their own character and all that thing. But I'm convinced that there's an intelligence at work in dreams too, where And in one of the dreams, the precognitive dreams I tell in the book, quite a few of them had to do with my ex-wife. And obviously when you're in a relationship with someone, that kind of thing, that's probably I don't even say it in this way, but the best, or put it this way, the most fertile kind of situation in which not only precognition, but other, paranormal things can happen. But this one happened after we had broken up, or this is a while ago, but somehow both living in London. And I saw her in a bookshop on Camden High Street. And I was in the back of the shop, she was in the front, and coward that I was, I didn't want to see her. So I didn't, sort of hid behind the diet books or something. And then I saw she left. And then that night, I dreamed that I was walking along Parkway from Camden High Street towards Regent's Park. And behind me, someone called my name. And I turned around, it was my ex-wife. So I chalked that up to guilt. And then that evening, I was indeed walking along Parkway because I was going to a lecture at the Temenos Society when it used to be held in, I forget exactly what the buildings were. There was some architectural office or something there. And yep, I'm walking along Parkway and I hear a voice call my name and turn around, and it's my ex-wife. So she was on her way to the same lecture. So apparently my unconscious or whatever is responsible for these sorts of things said, well, whether you want to see her or not, you have to, or you're going to. So, so I mean, everyone can say, well, what about all the times you dreamt that X happened and it didn't? So yeah, of course. That's why these things are strange. It's like, I don't, it's like, what? I'm sorry, that's the definition of an exception. Do you understand that? Yes, these stand out because they are strange. And no one's saying that every dream you have is precognitive. It might, but then again, I don't know. I mean, Dunn's theory is that, Dunn, there's this Priestley, I mean, Dunn's theory goes into infinite.
Yeah, if you can explain in detail about Priestley's serial time and everything else as well.
Right, yeah.
Just so you can explain exactly where Dunn was coming from on this.
Well, I said Dunn, I mean, even for Dunn, the dreams weren't that important. Dreams for Dunn were that by which he came to understand the true nature of time. So he wasn't particularly
Explain who J.W. Dunn was.
Okay, again, sorry. J.W. Dunn was an aeronautics engineer. And in 1920, I think it was 1927 or around there, he published a book called An Experiment in Time. And this was about something that happened to him much earlier, but he didn't write about it until then, where he discovered, as I mentioned earlier in passing, that he dreamed the future. And how he came upon this was that he dreamed that he was arguing with someone about the time, strangely enough, okay? Dream about time leading to dreaming ahead of time. How strange enough. There we go. The convolutions start already from the very beginning. And so he dreams that he's arguing with someone about the time. And he says it's 4:30 and the other person says it is. And he said, well, I will prove it to you. And he goes into his pocket and pulls out, this pocket watch. It's an old-fashioned pocket watch kind of thing. And lo and behold, it's 4:30 on the pocket watch. And in the dream, he wakes up. So he's in bed and he said, I wonder what time it really is. So he reaches over for his trousers, pulls out the pocket watch, and it's 4:30. So he thinks then that the watch must have stopped earlier in the day. He somehow took note of that, and that caused the dream. So okay. He said, I'll wind it now. I'll have to fix it to the right time later on. And he puts it back in his trousers and goes back to sleep. And he wakes up, pulls it out, thinking he has to set it to the right time. It is at the right time. So in the dream, he was told, in the dream, he insisted it was 4:30. He discovered it actually was 4:30. And then the clock had stopped at 4:30. And when he wound it, it started up again. So all this, Dunn said, well, what was that all about? And then he started having other sort of dreams like that. The most famous one where he dreamt that he was on an island, and cracks and fissures were opening up and steam was, escaping from them. And he knew that a volcano was going to explode. And he had to get the French authorities to get everybody off the island. Otherwise, 4,000 people would be killed. And it's only later on that he realized that he discovered that he had dreamt the eruption of Mount Pelée on Martinique. And I think it's 1902 or something like that. About 40,000 people lives were at stake. And what Dunn came to see was that he doesn't actually dream the actual event. He dreams what he's going to learn about the event. So he dreamed reading about it. And what he says is that he misread the headline in the dream. The headline in the dream was 40,000, but he misread it. All right, and so all this led him to say, well, this is, first off, this is some strange anomaly. Something must be wrong with him. He thought he was having, some affliction. But then through a series of meetings, chance meetings with people, he discovered that other people were having the same kind of a thing happening to them. So he came up with a theory that there's different kinds of time, different levels of time, we can say, different currents of time. And when we're in the waking state, our brains fix us to the present moment. And in a way, he doesn't really mention Bergson, but that's exactly what the French philosopher Henri Bergson is saying. The brain is an organ for the attention to life. How do we deal? How do we take care of that? How do we deal with things? We got to get away from the tiger. So and it's collecting information, and it's very fixed to the present moment. Has a one-track mind, we can say. There's the future ahead and past behind. But in dreams, we somehow slip off this harness. Our consciousness does. Our consciousness is no longer completely anchored in the brain, the physical brain, which is anchored in the present, and can rise up above, and it has access to the past, but also to the future. And so in the dream state, or time two, or this is where observer two is. Observer one is you and me right now, and anyone listening to this may be an observer two and is sleeping already. Observer two is in the sleeping state, where you're in a dream and you're accessible to that. But then he has to posit another observer and another time, because this is one of the things I raised. We talk about the stream of time, but where are the banks? Where are the banks on the stream of time? Or marble is the chariot racing towards us. Well, where are the pavement that flank the road? I mean, time is a stream without banks, which we can't really imagine. We could say that in a surrealist poem, but when you try to imagine it, you can't. There would just be an endless expanse with and so that would turn into nothing. So Dunn has to keep pausing another time. You step back from that time to sort of be able to gauge that time, and then another and another and another and another. So this turns into the philosophical horror known as infinite regress. And in the end, there's the unobserved observer, which is kind of like Aristotle's unmoved mover. And I think of it as a kind of combination of that and Bishop Berkeley. Where Berkeley is observing, so that like God, Berkeley says the essence of things is to be perceived. So I'm not looking at that tree in my garden, so it isn't really there. I will turn around and it will be there, but God's looking at it now, so that's why it's there. So you don't have to worry about that. So at the end of Dunn's infinite regress, there is sort of observer number one, who observes everything. And so that it's not very satisfying. So Priestley said, well, we don't need all this infinite regress of time. We really just need three levels of time, and the first three. And he said, okay, there's time one is the present, you're stuck to it. Time two, you have access to past and future. Time three, he said, is not necessarily only an observer. Time three can act and introduces free will. Because again, that's the thorn in all of this too. Precognition. Oh, well, are we predestined? Is this stuff predestined? Well, as you know, Priestley gives the example of the woman who dreamed that she was camping, and she went with her infant child, and she needed to wash something. She went down to the stream and put the child down, and then forgot the soap, went back to the tent, and when she got back to the stream, the child had gotten into the stream and drowned. So this was in a dream. And then sometime later, she found herself at a campsite with the infant child, having to wash something. And instead of leaving the child and going back to soap, she took the child with her in real life. So, well, skeptics might say, aha, that's not a true precognitive dream because the child didn't drown. But that's sort of saying, like, well, in order to prove my theory, I will accept, I'll let this go as proof of the theory if it means a child was not drowned. But for someone to press me for such severe proof seems unreasonable. So I would say, no, it wasn't, that is not precognitive, it's that she had the nous, she had the presence of mind to think, that dream was a warning, and now I can act. And this all has to do with levels of consciousness as well. Again, it's very mechanical when you're talking about predestination. Oh, that's going to happen. Priestley introduces this notion of free will, which is something to do with consciousness. And he was very interested in Jung. He's very interested in Ouspensky, Peter Ouspensky, from the work of Gurdjieff's work, and also his own theories about recurrence in six-dimensional time. And Maurice Nicoll, as I mentioned earlier, someone I've been writing about, who wrote about this, and was a student both of Jung and Ouspensky and Gurdjieff. He's a rather unusual individual, had three the main figures in, what do you want to call it, early 20th century Western alternative thought. I sound like, you have to have a college course on it or something, but we all know what we mean, But all these people were aware of these kind of strange different levels of time that have to do also with our levels of consciousness, being able to, understand them.
Yeah, because it's all very intriguing, isn't it? Because I was quite fascinated by it, and we've obviously covered very similar areas in my book in many, many ways. And one of the things that always intrigued me was a number of the other examples that Priestley gave. And I always particularly love one. And I first came across this in an article written, or an academic paper written, by somebody else who's been on this show, Dr. Arthur Funkhauser, who is recognized as being one of the world's experts in deja vu. And he has a concept he calls the dream theory of deja vu, which is that a deja vu is in fact a forgotten dream, that you've had a precognitive dream recently, but you've sublimated it and forgotten it. And then in our general reality, you start to experience the dream, but you can't quite remember when you experienced this. And he cited one incredible example, which I know that Dunn probably cites, and Priestley definitely cites as well. And, it's the lady with the monkey, where she has this terrible dream where she's attacked by a monkey, and she has this fear of monkeys. And she gets up the next day and she turns around to her husband and says, I had this terrible dream. I'm really psyched out about being attacked by a monkey. And the husband turns around and says, well, you don't normally go out for a walk on a Sunday or whatever it is, but go out today, go and walk along the Regent's Canal in Maida Vale, walk along there and walk down and just relax. So she then goes out and walks down the canal. And as she's walking down the canal, she sees jumping from rooftop to rooftop a monkey, which terrifies her. Now, the question there is that had she not had the dream which had terrified her, she wouldn't have gone out for the walk and wouldn't have seen the monkey. And you get these kind of, like the lady, like that classic case of the lady with the drowned baby. You get these kind of times within times, don't you? And it gets very, very intriguing.
Well, no, I said it's the temporal trapdoors start opening up, and in a way you can see where it's a bit, it can lead you sort of astray. So I mean, myself, I don't know. I mean, that was one idea about deja vu. Oh, it's a precognitive dream. So you dream this. I mean, Ouspensky thought, no, this is proof of recurrence or something like that. And then, there's a few other theories that, one side of your brain knew it, whatever, a nanosecond before the other side or something. And but I have to say, just phenomenologically, there's a different taste for me from deja vu to when I dream this. Deja vu is that's strange. It's like, I always remember there's no Monty Python episode like that, and it's always like, ooh. Whereas like dreaming, like pop, it's more like, you bang, and it's a tingle. It's a real. Priestley talks about the tang, and and it's like, yeah, it's like that. And you don't go out of your way looking for it. And there's no way. I mean, people already have sent me some correspondence saying, do you have techniques? And I said, oh, well, actually, there's no technique. I mean, I don't know of any way to make precognitive dream happen. And that's sort of like trying to predict or prophesize or something. I mean, you can put yourself in any number of receptive states and see what happens. But to me, it's more like just write your dreams down, pay attention to what goes on in your life, which is good advice at any time. And then, compare the two. And if it's just, I said, it's a kind of, and for me, at least my own experience, they not necessarily come in waves, or there's sort of patches. There's like a few of them, and then nothing happens for a while. And must have, you know, something to do with your, obviously your psychic state and emotional state and all that kind of thing, and stress, you know, if you're stressed. But also, I mean, a lot of the surface, you know, I also found like real shallow dreams can often be that too. I mean, and then I guess that links to hypnagogic state, which is like a shallow thing too. I mean, I put it up. It was a review on whatever, it was Amazon. I put it up on Facebook and Twitter from someone of the new book. And again, I'm hoping it's real, not a prank. But they said that you know, I started reading your book, then I had a nap, and I dreamed that the back door to my car had all like buckled in, and he had to, you know, kind of fix it and put it back in shape. And then soon after I had that nap, I had to go pick my son up, and when I got him and he went to get in the back seat, the window of the back, you know, door exploded, and he was covered in glass. And he said, I only wanted to read about precognitive dreams. I didn't necessarily want to have one. And I said, I'm sorry, use at your own risk. But, you know, I mean, again, I would count that as one. I mean, because it doesn't necessarily, okay, it didn't buckle, it exploded, but, you know, it was damaged in some way. You had to fix it in some way.
I think there's also an element with something like that as well, really makes me think of this kind of higher self element in cognitive dreams, whereby there may have been a crack that was subconscious in the level of that person's mind that they hadn't necessarily registered consciously, but that would lead the window to crack. I've had quite a lot of dreams where I could say I hadn't necessarily consciously absorbed some information, but it would make sense that I would have seen something and just not sort of recognized it.
No, I mean, that's true. I mean, yeah, that's possible. I mean, I keep an open mind, and I think that is, and to say that
they hadn't necessarily,
whatever you want to call it, the unconscious is very, it's very, very intelligent. You know, it's very intelligent, and that's why you say in dreams you often, I can see some kind of intelligence, and I don't mean an alien intelligence communicating me. It says whatever is responsible for it. Them, or I tend to say who now, because I think it's more of a who than a what.
I think there's also a case of there's not just one type of dream, there's so many different types of dreams, and so there will be those dreams that are definitely you could recognize as being higher self communication, other dreams that seem to have a psychic or future perception quality to them, and then other dreams which are anxiety dreams. I mean, I'm really interested in as you know, like the ancient culture of dreaming. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that within ancient dream interpretation, their preoccupation is always about the future. It's never about psychoanalyzing themselves or working out relationships or any of the kinds of things that we look at when we do psychoanalysis of dreams these days. And I think that's really interesting. And the way that they thought that dreams could predict the future was in this oracular sense as well. So that a dream, like you say, doesn't necessarily deliver a perfect version or vision of the future. It leaves clues and hints. And with Egyptian dream interpretation, like you say as well, obviously for them, their dream interpretation was all around word plays and puns. But of course, because they had the hieroglyphs, those hieroglyphs have a different experience in terms of a language when you write and read them down as well. And so dream interpreters were always literate scribes, and you kind of had to be literate to interpret a dream, because the dream communicated, like you say, through symbols, but you required a literate person to be able to read those symbols as words, as the phonetic values that they had. So they have this really, you know, dream interpretation is really complex and makes you wonder about literate people in ancient Egypt, how they saw the world. They almost saw the world as something of a dream in the first place, because the world is constantly communicating through the things of the world in readable words, which I find, you know, an amazing thing to sort of contemplate. But you know, I think that we could probably learn a lot about this idea of dream incubation and seeking out a dream and asking our dream to deliver messages to us. And perhaps, you know, we're so bombarded with information and data all the time now that our dreams are more sort of gobbledygooky, whereas ancient people had much more clear understandings of archetypes, mythology, nature, and relationships that are kind of perhaps lost to modern people.
Oh, I mean, without doubt. I mean, you know, I agree. You know, they probably had, what do you want to say? Well, less distraction, I guess. in a simple way. And no, I think you're absolutely right. And this interesting thing about sort of the kind of literacy needed to interpret the dream. It's one of the things I talk about in the beginning of the book. I mean, literature and dreams go back to the earliest days. I talk about Ashurbanipal, 620 BC or something, and he had a whole collection of dream tablets. It's not papyrus tablets going back 2,000 something years. So he kept hold of these records of dreams going back, millennia. And Ashurbanipal is pretty old for us, so those records would have been incredibly old. So, and then in that same collection was the discovery of Gilgamesh, which is, I guess, considered the first work of literature, what we would consider great literature.
Yeah,
and so I'm saying, so dreams have a literary character to them. They have dramatis personae. They have a narrative. They use metaphor, things of that sort. And so there's a literary kind of element to them to begin with.
Yeah, I think that the way language works in dreams is very interesting, and probably literacy and dreaming had a feedback system, because I notice myself writing dreams down and using words a lot that if I write a dream down and I actually read the words, sometimes the meaning of the dream is in wordplay and punning, and I wouldn't necessarily have picked up on it. So I had my friend contacted me the other day and said, Al mate's ex-wife, I had a dream that you got married, and the woman that had the dream about me is called Amanda. And then that night I had a dream that some other friend that I've known found a dead porpoise on the beach, and I dreamt that he initiated me into the Gnostic mysteries, and I took part in this sacred marriage ceremony. And then I realized that although it wasn't the Amanda that dreamt about getting married, we have a friend called Amanda who's like a bishop in the French Gnostic church. So I'd used the words and sort of mixed them up and made a marriage with someone called Amanda, but it was like a totally different scenario.
Well, again, that's, I mean, it is, we know this is Dream 101. It doesn't follow logical sequential patterns. It plays around with things, puts them into different, kind of blends and all that,
I think it's very much about attention, and one of the things I've noticed with dreams is that instead of looking at things close up, things become big. And I notice, when you do lucid dreaming, you kind of recognize that you're not just the avatar of yourself in the dream, you're the whole fabric of the dream. And when you start acknowledging that you're the whole fabric of the dream, I think that's how you have this expanded awareness of time as well. My friend Daniel Oldis in America is doing studies in time perception during lucid dreaming episodes, especially because lucid dreaming is supposed to track more or less to the same time signature as waking reality, and other dreams can have much more skewed perceptions of time. But one of the things that you do feel in lucid dreaming is, although the time might be going along the same lines as regular time, as you have this expanded experience of it. And I think it's because you have multiple perspectives from every almost atom of the dream scene.
Yeah, I mean, I don't talk about lucid dreams that much in the book. I have had them in the past. I can't say I've had them very often recently, but in the beginning of the book, I do talk about one. And to me, it was a kind of combination. I don't know, maybe you tell me if you think. I dreamt that I was on the back of a Vespa motorbike with somebody. I was living in New York at the time, but in the terrain we were going through was hilly, and there were palm trees, and it was, very bright, and sun and all this kind of thing. And so, and then at one point in the dream, there were these lorries, trucks, we say in the States, and across them it said cosmic consciousness. and it was like, whoa, and it was like a strange kind of dream in the first place. And so a few months later, I had moved from New York to Los Angeles, and I found myself actually on the back of a Vespa, which was being driven by this new friend I had made. And we're in this area of LA called Silver Lake, which is sort of not quite, it's down towards downtown, but it's very hilly, lots of palm trees, lots of old buildings, very much like what I had seen in the dream. And I didn't come across a truck saying cosmic consciousness, but when we passed a street that had the same name as this new friend I had made, and I pointed this out to him, the dream from a couple months back came back to me suddenly then on the bike. And I thought, oh, bloody hell. Well, I wouldn't have said bloody hell then because I lived in LA. But wow, I dreamed this. And then I had a brief moment of cosmic consciousness, because that sense of expansion and space opening up, that's what I felt. I felt like there were like, you know, walls that had gone down, like, or like a domino kind of effect around me the whole time. And and then with the same friend, not too long after, I had a early lucid dream. And all I remember of it was that in the dream, I'm talking to him and I say, is this a dream? And he said, yes, it is. So I mean, boo, 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 like that. So yeah, again, it's all, you know, I'm of a certain age. I guess over time, you tend to dream less. Even Jung said, you know, as you get older, he tended to dream a bit less. And the most vivid and I mean, again, this is another thing. It's not necessarily lucid, or in the sense that I'm awake in the dream. I know I'm awake, but I have these dreams where the what I call the crackle of reality. It is so absolutely. I mean, talk VR and HD, like they can't even come close to this. One dream I mentioned, an early one. Again, this is back from when I was playing a musician in the 70s in New York, late 70s. But I was on King Kong's shoulder, and he's swimming through the Hudson, circling Manhattan, and I'm like holding on, you know, to the furnace. Yeah, and it's like, you know, and there's this fantastic dream, New York, you know, with skyscrapers taller than they actually are, and all this kind of thing. So, so you could say, yes, I'm a young man, and I want to conquer New York, and you know, and this is when I'm first starting, you know, playing in a rock band and all that. But it was just the clarity, and the so the convincingness of it, that I guess that becomes one of the things that you question, right? And that can trigger a lucid dream.
Yeah. Gary, you know what? I was just thinking it might be better if you take your earplugs out, because I think that's making the sound worse. I think it might be better if you, because your mic's rubbing against.
Oh, okay. Well, people tell me the mic on the computer itself is not very good. That's why.
It might be better. Try it out for a sec.
What?
Don't use those. Unplug it all.
I think I will have to be like this, I made. So
no, it's fine. It's better.
Is it better? Well, this is exactly the wrong, not the wrong thing, it's exactly the opposite of what I told the last few times, but it's okay. Let's go for it.
Yeah, it's more the sort of clicking of the mic against your clothes.
Right.
Distracting.
It sounds okay from my side, but I have noticed in the chat room somebody's mentioned that as well. It's all very intriguing, this, because one of the kind of coincidence jokes that we were talking about earlier on was the 11/11 phenomenon, you know, and people talk about the 11/11 phenomenon. But one of the things that I found extraordinary was it was pointed out to me that the biggest 11/11 phenomenon in my life is the title of the Dutch language edition of my first book, which was Is There Life After Death? But they changed it in the Dutch edition to Life After Life After Life, which of course you'll like from the Ouspensky point of view. And Life After Life After Life in Dutch is 11/11/11. And you're going, oh, come on. And that's when you get the joke. That's when you go, well, that's not attention bias. I didn't create that in any shape or form. But you go, wow, you know. And for instance, I know, Gary, one of my favorite stories that you tell is your writing of the song and your girlfriend knowing that you were up to things. I mean, I know you've mentioned this in other interviews, but I still love this story.
No, it's just, again, my interest in all this sort of thing started when I was playing in Blondie ages ago, in the late 70s. And I started reading all of this. First, I started reading Colin Wilson, started reading, just gobbling down everything about the occult and paranormal, mysticism, and all that stuff. And out of that, and my girlfriend at the time, she became interested in it too. And during the first Blondie tour, we discovered that we were sharing dreams, or when we wanted to call each other, it'd be at the same time. And this is way before mobile phones, so you had to arrange to be at the phone booth wherever it was at the hotel, and whatever, all that kind of thing. And then it was all this sort of stuff where we seemed to be in contact with each other, mentally, although spatially far apart. So I wrote the song called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," which became a big hit here and in Europe, well, not so much in the States, which is about the shared dreaming and all this sort of thing. And I think it's one of the only songs with the word theosophy in its lyrics that's in top 10.
So that's a claim to fame. That's brilliant to know that one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so see, during all that time, so I mean, you wouldn't know it so much from looking at the band and what we were doing, but I was just getting more and more interested into it. And then gradually my interest shifted more to this sort of thing than to doing music. But it took some time. You know, I stopped playing music around 80, 82, at the end of 81, and then it wasn't until the early 90s that I started publishing reviews and articles and stuff. So it took quite some time to learn how to write anything that anyone would want to read. And
but your interests are phenomenal, aren't they? Because you write about so many people, in such an extraordinary way, and you have this ability to make them come alive. Your biography of Colin Wilson, I can say I really thoroughly enjoyed that. I thought that was an exceptional piece of work. Really.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I have to say that's a book I wanted to write for a long time. He's my inspiration and mentor and all that kind of thing. And he was to many other people too. I mean, you mentioned Colin Stanley and the Colin Wilson sort of society. Quite a few people he's been very influential on, and he's a very generous individual with all that. And but I find them all interesting. I mean, these remarkable people, like Blavatsky or Crowley or Ouspensky or Swedenborg or Steiner or Jung. I mean, they're all remarkable, interesting people. And then I like having the opportunity to say, okay, this is my take on them. This is what I get out of them. And then you see lots of similarities. I mean, doing this recently, I said about Morris Nickel. I mean, so Gurdjieff ideas come into it, Jung's ideas too. And in many ways, there are quite a few similarities between them. That's one thing I try to do with people that, in that, I'm a Jungian or I'm a Steiner or something like that. And I say, well, you should check these other people out too, just to show this kind of common interest. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it's a weird thing, because if you're say writers, you like novels, and I love whatever Dostoevsky, I can't I like Dickens. You can like all these different people that are very, very different, but in this kind of thing, you're supposed to be a Swedenborgian or a Jungian, or I'm Wicca, or I'm that. And I just think just put it all in a big pot and see what happens, and and get, what do you get out of it? So I can understand people wanting an identity in some way of a tradition or something like that. And if they found something that works for them, then absolutely. But I guess I would say, the Hermetic tradition, which I've written about, is this tradition of synthesis and syncretism, and bringing things that are different together in some way. And you always find out that it's kind of like, oh no, Hermes Trismegistos, he really didn't write these books down at the dawn of time. But it's sort of like, well, who cares? I mean, the books are still fascinating, and and so maybe Wicca doesn't go back to an ancient fertility religion, a la Margaret Murray, maybe it's Gardner, but great, it's creative. It's a creative endeavor. It's rather than like, you have to find the true path and stick to it. So that I'm kind of in that, more in that, not to denigrate in any way, sticking to a tradition. Some people very much, that's what they want to do, and it works for them. But
one of the things that somebody else has said, and I think I'll agree with this as well, is, Gary, that probably you may have to put the headphones back on again. You're quite right. You're fading in and out slightly.
Yeah, it's sorry. I'll try to hold the mic. It's the Black Brotherhood.
Yeah, it is.
The Black Brotherhood. They interfere with everything.
Sarah and I know about this. It's the Archons. We know how the Archons work. Well, we don't actually. If we did, we'd be able to block them in some way, but we can never manage it somehow, which is one of these things. Because one of Tim Bragg, who's a friend of mine that lives in France, and I know that he's particularly interested. He thought it was going to be starting at 5, by the way.
Oh no.
He's very keen to know, have you discussed Swedenborg at all? And of course, we haven't yet. But before we move on to Swedenborg, I've always wanted to ask you this question, because you're such an eclectic thinker, and you know about so many different writers and everything else. Where have you ended up now? At we're virtually the same age as well. So where has this placed you in terms of your intellectual journey? Where are you now in terms of your understanding of this great mystery that is life? Because you've touched upon so many great thinkers, and it must rub off on, well, it obviously has rubbed off on you in terms of what do you think?
It'll sound cliche, but I think I'm just beginning, actually, to tell you the truth. I think what I've done in all the work up to now is more or less it's not like I decided to do this. It's looking back, it seems, this has come out of that. It seems like just established, what do you want to call it? Kind of established this tradition, alternative, whatever, it's like, is it the Western esoteric tradition, Hermetic tradition? Well, I don't know, is Bergson, William James, they're not really in that, but they're people that so I don't know, whatever you want to call, it's got, it seems to me I've established a kind of body or canon, let's say, of ideas from these different people, that say on the fringe, like Steiner and Swedenborg and Ouspensky and those. Some are more mid-range, like Jung. And then you've got, William James, Henri Bergson. Bergson was a Nobel Prize winner. So, I mean, these are mainstream people from 100 years ago, let's say. And then with other philosophers, I mean, Colin Wilson, he builds, he starts out working phenomenology. He's the homegrown British existentialist, but he's trying to take it to what he calls a positive, or a new existentialism that's not hamstrung by the kind of gloomy, perspective of Sartre and Heidegger and all that. And he anchors his work in Husserl's phenomenology. And the fundamental idea of that is perception is intentional, like consciousness is somehow, it's not a mirror reflecting things, it's a hand reaching out and grabbing them. And you can have a good grip, a bad grip, or no grip at all. And so these moments of intensity or peak experiences or mystical experiences, they're kind of moments in which this intentionality is somehow, triggered more. We become more aware of it in that way. And I think I've managed to link this to a good deal of what's happening in the Western esoteric Hermetic kind of tradition. And in general, I mean, these are just ways to say what you do. Is like evolution of consciousness. Sounds a bit, pompous and all that, but that's more or less what I'm kind of looking at. It's like, okay, we seem to have arrived here where we are now. If you know your history, at an earlier time, people did seem to see the world in a different way than we see it today. And we can just think, okay, they were just mistaken about things. But the evidence suggests that no, they didn't just have bad ideas about the world, and we have good ideas about the world. They actually saw it. I mean, they experienced it in a very different way. And I talk of this in terms of a participatory kind of consciousness, where the barrier between what's in here and what's out there was permeable and not kind of very sharp and adamant as it is for us. For we moderns, we got a little puddle of consciousness in our head somewhere. You might have lost some, because she got banged in the head. And that's in there, and it ain't out there anyway. It ain't none of it out there anywhere. Out there is just, stuff that is moved around, by forces and cause and effect. And, that's it. And that's how we see the world now. But it may not have been at an earlier time. And we may very well have, evidence of people seeing the world in another way that's a combination of the two. And that's what I would call the sort of, what I would see where we're trying to get to is some way where we maintain the independent, logical left brain consciousness that gives us this sharp clarity and allows us to analyze experience. But if we go too far in that direction, everything just turns into bits and pieces. And there's nothing holds anything together. The earlier, more right brain, participatory, holistic, vague, but connected, which is full of implicit meanings that you feel, but you can't put your finger on. Just the meanings that we feel in great works of music and poetry and art and mystical experiences in sunsets in nature. Oh yes, this is exactly why Mozart's Jupiter Symphony does that to me. It's right there. You put those three notes together. It's like, that doesn't work like that. It's like
Good
people
point.
have written
Excellent.
reams and reams and reams. No one's going to argue with you about a hypotenuse, and if they do, no one's going to argue about whatever, a right angle or something. It's there. You can prove it no matter where you go, this side of the universe and the other. But we can argue all night about what the Brothers Karamazov is about, and still argue about it. Although today, I guess that might be one of the books that are being banned in America. I mean, I keep getting all these notices from friends in America. They keep banning, like, well, maybe I shouldn't even mention it. Somebody will probably hear it and go out of the way to ban it now. No, not your listeners. They won't do that. But that was a public service announcement.
It was a good one.
It makes me think of the Theosophy Society's kind of phrase, there's no religion higher than truth. And I think you're so right about all of those things that you just said. And I think absolutely, I do think that this shift in consciousness has probably happened with regards to literacy levels and things. Like once we started naming everything, we started to compartmentalize stuff, and we have a different perception of reality when we give things names. Because like you say, when you witness a beautiful sunrise or you hear a beautiful symphony, it's a feeling response and not a analytical, intellectual response to those things. So I think, that's a great point.
No, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, for the factual science, the sunset is, whatever collection of variety of electromagnetic waves or something. But to you, it's that remarkably unique tinge of pink and purple over there that you like, oh, if you didn't stop and look at it, you would know. I mean, and no, I think you're absolutely right. This is a wonderful book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess by a fellow named Leonard Schlein that I think came out in the 90s. And his argument is basically the rise of literacy, which and the Phoenician alphabet, more or less. He says this started the demise of the previous matriarchal, more image-based, intuitive, feeling-based culture. And, we have what we have now and all that. And again, left brain, right brain, we can do that, but it's sort of, I mean, I would say this is the thing, it's my handy formula. The left brain is about business, right brain is about isness. Okay, so the left brain is about taking care of business, dealing with things. And that's why it turns everything into this dehydrated sort of set of symbols and stuff, because you don't need to know the make and model of the car coming at you down the road. You just need to know some huge thing is hurtling at you and you got to get out of the way. Later on, when you're walking, you can see, oh, look at that Mercedes, 1963, whatever it is, and check out its, unique interior design. But that information is of no help to you when you're trying to survive. But that's evolutionarily, that's we got our foot stuck on that pedal. I mean, that's the problem, And to me, it's important to recognize that it's not original sin in some kind of way, or we're trapped in a false world, as the Gnostics would say. It's an evolutionary problem. I mean, the left brain is something devised in order to help us survive. Okay, and when we relax, we sometimes remember why we want to survive in the first place, and the sunsets and the beauties and all that. And this is the kind of thing this is the really tough thing to get. I think even people today who want to know this understand. I'm teaching a course now on the history of Western esotericism for the California Institute of Integral Studies. It's an online course. But I'm trying to get them to see, they're talking about this, and one of the first things they want to do, they want to immediately know what to do. What can we do? What can we do about the right brain to save the world or to make a better society? I'm saying wanting to, let me just finish. I'm sorry. Wanting to do is a left brain thing. The left brain manically wants to do all the time. It never wants to stop and just let me be for a moment, or let me understand. And that's the problem. And it's, I know we're in a horrible time of crisis and all that. And the urgency levels are, popping, the top. But it's like, I think the first thing we need to do is stop wanting to do. There you go. The first thing we need to do is to stop wanting to do. So we're back to Wu Wei or something like that. But that's very much, I would say, I'm trying to get this across to them. It's like the right brain. It's like, it's not about doing anything. It's about sort of well, McGilchrist says it's like it's presencing. It presences the world. It gives you the world in this immediacy, in all its living nowness and all that. Its presence. But in order for us to survive, we need to pick our way through that. And so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short there.
No, I was just going to say that if perhaps you wanted to silence it, you could drop a clock on it like Anthony did earlier today. Whatever you did. What side of your brain was it, Anthony?
The top bit. Because very much when Gary was talking there, I was thinking, you know, about the way in which people like Wordsworth, you know, when Wordsworth was putting together, you know, those few lines a few miles above Tintern Abbey, when he was saying, you know, I've seen something in the light of setting suns. Gary was hitting the nail on the head there. It's that noetic moment. It's that feeling of oneness with everything that we miss in this society. And it's sometimes, you know, when you just get that moment of wonder. Because, for instance, Gary, one of the things I wanted to mention to you, because you mention it in your article, is the Toynbee incident. And if you can explain that in a second, but I'll just explain something that happened to me that was almost identical to Toynbee. That happened when I was in a place called Miletus, which is on the Turkish coast of the Aegean coast. And it's an ancient Greek site. It's where various Greek philosophers started up. People like Thales, I think, was there, various other individuals. And I was there and I had this really weird sensation that I needed to walk away from the group. There was only a small group of us, and I walked away and I sat on the top of a derelict mosque. And I looked along the Menderes River, you know, and the Menderes River is this kind of silted up river valley. And it's huge. It's where the word meander comes from. And as I was doing so, there was this kind of what Jenny Randalls would call the Oz factor. The air seemed electric. I still can't define what it was, but the air was electric around me. And suddenly there was a shimmer in the air around me. And the river, the valley became sea. And it was an arm of the sea. And a hill in the distance became an island. And then I swear I can still see this in my mind's eye. Coming round the corner of the island was a Greek tyrammy with the kind of the curved front. And then I snapped out of it. It was almost again like a hypnagogic image, you know, that you see in the periphery of your vision. And if you look at it, you know, it'll fade away. So you have to draw it towards you. And now the interesting thing is, we'll touch on Toynbee now, but what was extraordinary about this was about a month later, there was an article in the Sunday Times. And the Sunday Times travel columnist, this was 1984, I think. Well, I don't think I know, it was 1984. And in it, he writes about Miletus, and he said he had the most extraordinary time slip take place while he was there. He didn't explain what it was. And then immediately, you know, I thought of the Toynbee incident, which you cite. So now that segues perfectly into that Toynbee.
Yeah, I mean, Toynbee is Arnold Toynbee, 20th century historian. I think he died in the 70s. And he wrote an enormous work just called The Study of History. And I think it's in the 10th volume. He tells how he came to write the book, the inspiration for it. And he tells the story of what he calls time slips. And one of the ones is at a Greek city called Mistra. Well, the remains of a Greek city called Mistra. It was a very important city in the history of Western esotericism because Gemistos Plethon, who reintroduced Plato and the idea of the great chain of initiates to Cosimo de' Medici during the Council of Florence and Ferrara, came from Mistra. So
did he really?
Oh, yeah. I was there. Little side note. He was Byzantine. But it was part of the Byzantine.
Because it's an amazing city, isn't it? You know, it sits on the hillside in the Peloponnese, and it's just a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. So what happened is Toynbee was visiting the ruins of Mistra, and this would have been about, I don't know, 1912 or something like that. And it's a ruin because in, I think it was 1821 or something, it had been overrun by Highland warriors during some battle, and it just was decimated and left. So Toynbee knew that had happened there. But as he sat there, I think munching on a bar chocolate and looking out on the plain, he suddenly felt that he had been transported back to the actual massacre taking place around him. And And similar things like that happened to him on other ones. He was in Tenochtitlan, with the Spaniards. He was sacking Constantinople well, he wasn't one of the sackers, but he was there in Constantinople being sacked by during the First Crusade. And one of the ones that was remarkable, he said, was he was walking near Victoria Station, and he sort of saw a panorama of all of history. This vast kind of parade opening up before him. And Toynbee, he's a historian, not a occultist in any way whatsoever. A religious man. He was, we call spiritual, I don't know, but he was certainly a religious man. This is what sent him back, and he actually felt, and there were some occasions where he felt like he could see things that like the battle he would go to. It's sort of like, oh, he didn't know that whatever general had his horses flanking, the opposition on that hill or something. So he sort of knew how the battles were, but then he would see things that, oh no. So it was as if he was sent back and he was getting, clear sight into it. And the reason I mention this is, and this is one of the first things I read about when I read Colin Wilson's book, The Occult, many, many years ago, that got me going and why we're having this conversation now, is that he talks about something he calls faculty X, and it's called faculty X because we just don't have a name for it. But it's what he calls the ability to grasp the reality of other times and places, not the fact that they took place, and it's not a nostalgia for some previous time. It's the fact that they are just as real as you now here are real. And we tend to limit our notion of reality to what's immediately before us. And linked to this is Wilson's definition of imagination. It says it's the ability to grasp realities that are not immediately present. All right. So it was a reality that the Highlanders decimated Mistra at that time, but and Toynbee knew it, but then he really knew it, or he knew it in italics, as I tend to say it, and say, like, but again, we don't have a language for this. We don't have a language of this kind of thing. We talk about the Proustian moment. So we know it in literature. And another example Wilson gives is the opening of Proust's novel, Remembrance of Things Past. When Marcel, he tastes a bit of Madeleine dipped in a tisson, and it's, what was that? And he doesn't know what it is, but it's some memory, and he forces it, and he finally remembers, yes, when I was a little boy, we used to go on holiday to Cambrai, and his aunt or grandmother, whatever, used to give him a taste of the Madeleine crumbled up in a teaspoon in a tisson. And he suddenly felt like I was no longer felt accidental, or arbitrary, inconsequential. I was up above time. So this memory lifted him up above time. And the whole enormous novel, which is not quite as long as Toynbee's study of history, but it's close enough, is about his attempt to bring back, these remembrances of things past. And there's different episodes. This wonderful episode, like the smell of a urinal. I forget where this is, reminds him of somewhere else where he had it, or there's a loose paving stone somewhere. And I can tell you my own experience when I was first reading Wilson and all this. I remember once when I was living in New York, and I was walking along 6th Avenue, and in 8th Street, so in the Village. So if you know New York, that's a very, very busy spot there. And I'm walking along the street, and this must have been about 1978, maybe. So I was in my teens, not exactly, I was in my 20s. Can't lie anymore. But I was walking along the road, and I saw this just below me, a flash of that kind of red flash, a metallic kind of red flash of a glitter, like, tinsel, or like, the stuff you put up on Christmas trees or something like that. And it suddenly reminded me of something. And I just, what is this? And so I'm doing a Proust. So I stood there in the middle of the street and stared down at this, like, this was this tinsel kind of, wrapping paper, in the pavement. And I would not move until I dredged this up. And I remember what it was. It was this kind of tinsely wrapping paper on these caps we used to put in a cap gun. There was I don't know if they had them. The caps were this kind of roll of stuff, a little bit of, gunpowder, and you put it in a gun, bang. And they came in this kind of, I don't know why they came in that wrapper, but they came in this particular wrapper that was just like that. And they're just like, I hadn't thought of that probably since, last year. No, I hadn't thought of that since I was about, I don't know how old I was, 10 years old or something. And, So it's like it's all there, and this leads us into like people like Wilder Penfield, you know, and his discovery.
Gary, have you come across the work of Esther Salomon at all?
Top of my head, I can't say I have. No.
Okay, she was a Russian scientist, I think, come philosopher, and she wrote an incredible book called A Timeless Moment. Is it A Timeless Moment?
Is she the one who did the TED talk about this?
No, she's. I know who you're thinking of.
Right.
That's Jill Bolte.
Okay, all right. Right.
No, Esther Salomon is probably not still alive. She probably wrote this book in the 1950s, 1960s.
Oh, okay.
And she talks about the things she called charged memories. And you know, those charged memories where you remember an incident in your childhood, but it's an incident that nothing of significance happened. Somebody didn't come and say your family had been killed. It's just a feeling that as if as Wilder Penfield would argue, the tape was super saturated at that point, and you remember it intensely. And she cites one wonderful example, Harriet Martineau, and the English writer, and she was blind, I think, and she explains how she used to have a vivid memory of being carried by her sister, and her sister had a fur ruff around the top of her dress, and she just felt the feeling of that. And it's as if, you know, sort of touch and our senses is almost synesthetic in the way that these memories are evoked. And I think, you know, like Proust with the Madeleine cake, it's something that really you touch against something, don't you? When these things happen, it's like a wake-up call. You suddenly touch what Philip K. Dick would call orthogonal time almost. You know, the time at a right angle to this time, where everything fills. And of course, that is then going back, isn't it, to J.W. Dunn and his idea of the nesting of times that all overlap on each other.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, smell is one of the things that brings the Proustian moment on, you know, or music often. And it's Bergson, what he called involuntary memory. You know, there's it's what Sarah was saying. You know, we pick up stuff. We conscious we, you know, going about our day, don't realize that we're picking it up. Proust himself didn't think, oh yes, I wonder what that Tisson tasted like back then. You know, he didn't even remember that he remembered it. You know what I mean? Until he tasted it again, and then it evoked it in some way. Why those things? Why do they happen like that? I don't know. I mean, Bergson has all different ideas, philosophy, why the involuntary memory comes up.
It's supposed to be as well linked with the brain structures, and I think the amygdala is very close to the place where smell is processed, so therefore there's a kind of a linkage there. But that doesn't explain that.
Hippocampus, isn't it? Where it's really close.
Yes.
Direct link to the hippocampus, so smells are immediately conjure up memories. And actually it's something that I've been working with for lucidity, because you can use olfactory senses to give people a dream of something that they associate with a particular strong smell. So it won't necessarily bring up the image of the thing that the smell relates to, but it will bring up a scene from your past where that smell is related to it, which I find really interesting. But I was just thinking, what the smell for me that always reminds me of stuff, and I don't really ever smell it anymore, because I think it was when the seas were a bit dirtier, is that beach tar, that warm beach tar you get on beaches in Devon.
Under the boardwalk.
Particular lovely smell, but you never smell it anymore.
Oh no, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, there's things. I mean, yeah. I mean, like since living here, I've lived in London now 26 years. The smells I don't come across that would be on the East Coast or in California or something like that, or you know, the peculiar kind of rarefied character to LA after, you know, heavy rain, you know, which is not quite the same as here and all that. So, I mean, there's a wonderful book, God, what was it called? The Black Goddess and the Unseen Real. There's a poet named Peter Redgrove who died some years ago. And with Penelope Shuttle, they wrote a famous book called The Wise Wound, which was about menstrual cycle, linking it to psychic abilities and the witch hunts and things of that sort. But this Black Goddess, the Unseen Real, is all about how we in the West, we tend to favor sight over all the other senses, and so we lose touch with them, and how there's aspects and dimensions and characters of reality that come through to us. I mean, immediate sensory reality. And he talks about poets like, Coleridge. He could feel a storm coming on. He'd get a migraine or so. Or Anthony's written about migraines and all that. So there's all. Nietzsche was very sensitive, incredibly sensitive to slight, microclimactic changes in the different valleys he's walking through in Switzerland and all that. So yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, having to edit out so much stuff in order to be successful at maneuvering through this world we've created, it's given us many advantages, but we've certainly lost a heck of a lot at the same time.
Yeah, I think we are way more sensitive than we give ourselves credit for in that respect. Like with sounds in particular, there's so much noise pollution in like normal built up cities, and so much light pollution that we can't look at the stars properly anymore as well. And I always remember this radio documentary I listened to once, which was about the first steam train, I think, and the first passengers on it going through England, and that two women fainted because they were so overwhelmed by the speed and the vibration and the loudness. And you think we're still really those physically, we're still very much the same human beings that were fainting going on a train. So I don't think that we're naturally kind of set up for the amount of sound and distraction that we have in our lives. I think that it makes us sort of confused and anxious, and that's probably why there is so much anxiety.
Well, it's good for business. Because if people are confused and anxious, they'll buy more stuff and make them feel a little less confused and anxious for a while. So, I mean, I would say unplug. You should make a habit every day to unplug for a while. I mean, and it's harder and harder to do that. I mean, to peace and quiet are at a premium now.
Yeah, true. Like you're paying for, I mean, you used to go to Switzerland to pay for good quality air, didn't you? And it was rated according to its quality. But I think very much so, like people were wanting to go back to sort of peasant life and have like linen clothes and eat simple foods and live amongst like wood and stone, because actually it feels better. Steiner was really into that, wasn't he? Like materials and things.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if you've ever been to the Weald Downland Museum in Sussex on the South Downs. I am desperate to live in a wattle and daub house because they're amazing. They've got such a lovely energy. They feel so relaxing. And sometimes when I'm lying in my bed, I can feel the trains going underneath the ground, or someone's washing machine like two doors down. And I think that, that's our life these days. We're constantly being vibrated, essentially.
I lived in a wattle and daub house for about a year in a village called Great Dunmow in Essex, and it definitely had a very different ambience. There was something different, and it's very difficult to quantify, isn't it? And again, it's what we're touching upon here. It's the idea of, as Gary said, and it's what I'm calling the egregorial, the idea that there's this kind of overlap between our perception of reality and what reality really is. There's this overlap of expectations of what reality is. And again, going back to Gary's reference earlier on to Henri Bergson and C.D. Broad and the idea that the brain is an attenuator and it takes out information. And I think Gary's point was a powerful one, the idea that it is we reduce down in order to survive in the most effective way in the world we live within. But we take our language out and everything else. You have the concept of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and the way in which language molds the way we perceive the world. We are living in this very strange time, and I think we have this great wanting to be more out there. As Surrey, our mutual friend Kaz Coronel, I still talk about this, and it's when she said, to me, and it was such a powerful word when she said, go outside, take your shoes and socks off and feel the telluric forces of the ground under your feet, because we never do that, do we?
I do it quite a lot in Hastings. I do like swimming in the sea. It's great for that.
All right. You're the sandy shore of Hastings then. On the sandy shore. Yeah.
Well, it's not sandy. None of the kids that live in Hastings like sandy beaches, which is quite funny. So anytime you try to go on holiday, like somewhere nice with a sandy beach, they complain because they prefer pebble beaches, because sand doesn't go everywhere and get into sandwiches and things, and also doesn't get as boiling hot.
Well, I mean, I can't get to the beach or any natural spot. Well, Hampstead Heath, I can, but in my neighborhood, I walk around. It's very leafy, North London, West Hampstead. But I do find myself early evening, let's say, when the first star kind of comes out, stopping and looking at it, or maybe looking at the cloud or the sunset. And I wonder if I just stood there for a while, would people think I was weird or strange, or am I of an age where they think, oh, poor dear, he's starting to lose it? But I often think, like, and I actually want to say to them, hey, do you see the star? I mean, it sounds absolutely banal and ridiculous, and it's like hug a tree or something, but it is sort of like, I mean, and I don't want to start doing that because I think I'll get carted away.
Oh, I think you can get away with that in Hampstead. Have you drank
Yeah,
from?
yeah.
There's a really nice chalybeate spring in Hampstead. I drank from it the other day. It's what's the name of it? It's a fountain, and
I know it.
corner. It's got like a gorgon style mouth on the side.
Yeah.
It's really nice. Hampstead Heath's really lovely.
No, it's fantastic. No, Hampstead is fantastic. I mean, where I live is absolutely fantastic because I've got Hampstead Heath, and then I've got the other direction. I've got Primrose Hill, and then Regent's Park. So I can't complain. And the neighborhood, I love this neighborhood. Because just talking about it now, because it's all 1887 or something. So it's all kind of Sherlock Holmes, Jack the Ripper, Gaslight, London, Man Blavatsky time as well. So I just like that. I like that feel.
There's a blue plaque for J.B. Priestley as well. There somewhere, isn't it? By the
that's up in Highgate.
Springs.
Yeah, there's one up in Highgate, up that way. And no, I mean, there's a whole. I mean, Hampstead has a whole history of all. Kind of R.D. Laing lived around here. Freud, was here his last year of his life. Funny thing, I mean, just rambling here, but I've given 2 talks at the Freud Museum, which is not far from where I live, both on Jung, strangely enough. So I had to go to Freud's house to talk about Jung. But one of the talks was about Jung, the mystic, and Jung's, interest in the occult and parapsychology. And there's the famous story of the poltergeist in Freud's bookcase when Jung visited Freud in Vienna, and they got into an argument about, the occult and I forget. Freud said it's all bosh, and there was a sudden bang. And Jung says, there's an example of an exteriorization catalytic phenomena, which is long-winded, her German doctor professor for poltergeist. And then Freud said, bosh. He said, no, it isn't. There'll be another one now. And then there was. And then Freud just freaked out. And Jung is in account. He said Freud was aghast. And I always just think the eyebrows go up and the cigar drops out of his mouth, and he's like that. And he was afraid. He was afraid of Jung after that. But at the Freud Museum, I asked him, are these the same bookcases from Vienna? Because they recreate Freud's, or whatever it was, Neunzehn, I forget what it was, Biergasse, or I forget. And they said, yeah, we think there's the same one. So I wonder, it's the poltergeist still there on the bookcase. So I wonder.
Well, I suppose the problem is now that with Spotify, Jung is not on there anymore, is he? So I suppose got quite upset, really.
Very good, very good.
But that's very interesting, isn't it? That could be that bookcase.
I asked, and they said, yeah, it's pretty much. They had it shipped over, and all this kind of stuff. So that must have been remarkable in the first case to ship it over. But I guess they wanted to make it as much like where he lived. In Vienna.
Because moving on then, in terms of that, the person that my friend wanted to talk about, your opinions on Swedenborg, because I remember to my embarrassment, you being queued up outside when we did that event at the Swedenborg Center, and you couldn't get in.
It was SRO. It was SRO for you, Tony. So it's all right. Yeah.
It was good. It was interesting exercise that.
Yeah.
But Swedenborg, to me, is always somebody that's intrigued me. And I was last at the Swedenborg house about 18 months ago, and I picked up a number of books on that, and I hadn't realized just how he was interested in particularly esoteric Islam and Sufism, which quite surprised me. So what's your opinions on him? He was a fascinating man, wasn't he?
Oh, and he was absolutely fascinating, Swedenborg. And he was interested in any number of things. And I think Henri Corbin, who's written about Persian mysticism, and is the fellow who coined the term the imaginal He's written about Swedenborg and Sufis and Sufism and things of that sort. But D.T. Suzuki, the other side of the planet, called him the Buddha of the North, and said, D.T. Suzuki was a fellow who introduced Zen Buddhism pretty much to the West, and he, spoke very highly of Swedenborg. Swedenborg was a remarkable Enlightenment figure. For, we could say, the first half of his career, he was pretty much a scientist, not an experimental scientist, but he studied all of the science of the day, and he, studied all the anatomy, and he wrote reams about the brain. He wrote reams about astronomy. He predicted things about like black holes and a variety of quasars and things of that sort, well in advance. And he probably came up with the nebula theory of the solar system formation before Kant and Laplace. You get this dust that spins around, and it slowly congeals, and then you get the planets. And he has a whole idea about that too. And he traveled a great deal. He spent many years in London, and he met Halley, Flamsteed, the Royal Astronomer, other people from the Royal Society. So, and he started the first Swedish scientific journal. I think it was called the Daedalus or something like that. And he was traveling as an agent of the Society of the Curious. I think that's what it was called in Sweden at the time. But he was also involved with Freemasonry. There's a 1700s, there's the sort of connection between Scottish Freemasonry and returning the Stuarts to the throne, and the French were involved with that, and the Swedes were sort of siding with the French. I get that. And so the esoteric Freemasonry, it also had, radical political elements in it, and that sort of thing. But in his early 50s, he well, and even before, I was gonna say, he went through these series of strange episodes, called them psychotic episodes or trance states, where he was visited by Jesus. This happened in London in the East End. And he was basically told to stop his scientific pursuits, which at the time he wanted to find the seat of the soul. Descartes tried and couldn't find it, but he agreed with Descartes, it must be in the pineal gland. He talking about the right and left side of the brain. He was talking about that, back then as well. But before even, I should say, about these experiences he had, he studied Kabbalah. He studied a variety of different sort of erato-mystical practices. He was involved with the Moravians, a sect of the Moravians out on Fetter Lane. And as Marcia Keats Souchard wrote this fantastic book called When Mrs. Blake Cried, because Blake was a later generation. He was a follower of Swedenborg, and he wanted to follow some of Swedenborg's sort of eratos sexual, ideas. And Mrs. Blake wasn't that happy about that. And he was a student of Rabbi Falk, who was a strange figure in the East End of London, who may have been one of the unknown superiors that Yeats refers to in his autobiographies. And the secret chiefs and the Golden Dawn kind of tradition, his name comes up in that. And he had a sort of Kabbalah shop on the Old London Bridge, and he taught classes in Kabbalah, but also in this kind of erato mystical pursuits that had linked up with what's his name, Zeb. I can't remember his name right now. The fellow who claimed to be the Messiah, and then he had to recant before the Sultan, otherwise he would have his head cut off. I can't remember his name right now, but he was a Jewish prophet, Messiah figure in the Middle Ages, and had many followers and all that. Any case, he had these visionary experiences, and he gave up the science, and he claimed to have been taken to heaven and hell on these journeys by angels and shown around. Hell is a place much like Earth, but worse, and heaven's a place much like Earth, but better. And then there's also the spirit world, which is an intermediary place where your true affections come out, and what you really want, as the Spice Girls used to say, that decides where you go, whether to heaven or hell. And he also journeyed to other planets, and apparently he took these journeys in extended periods of hypnagogia. But his main mission was to interpret the true meaning of the Bible, the true meaning of Scripture, and this was what he called correspondences. That there's correspondence between the physical world and the higher spiritual worlds above, higher levels of reality. And scripture is about understanding the correspondences between those sorts of things. So that's a very quick kind of thing. But he was a remarkable figure. I mean, in many ways, he's kind of presented, I should say, a bit bland. It kind of, I don't know what you say. There's a kind of a cult-free sort of Swedenborg that many of the followers want to sort of present, because he's also famous for psychic experiences and talking with the dead. It's a famous example where his renown in these matters had reached the Queen of Sweden, and she asked for an audience with him, and he came, and she jokingly said, "Oh, well, have you met my brother in the afterlife?" And he said, "Not yet, madam, but do you have a message for him?" And she said, "Yes, I do." And she gave him, and then next time he said, "Oh, by the way, I did speak with your brother," and he went over and whispered to her, and she said, "No one would know what, only my brother would know what this was." And there's many other examples as well. So he's one of these remarkable characters who, say, brought the two kinds of things together. He had a completely scientific background, and he was also an engineer. I mean, he worked on the Trollhättan canals in Sweden. He once figured out a way to get the Swedish Navy from one side of Sweden to the other on land during this war between Norway and Sweden, or Denmark, whatever it was. So he was remarkably handy, and he was an assessor of mines. So he's one of these guys who's like, he wasn't, the mystic sitting in some state contemplating his navel. He was a very active individual, scientist, engineer, practical character. He was a statesman. But he also went on these inner journeys to heaven and hell and told us about them.
I was quite fascinated when I was last at the Swedenborgian house, and I picked up the magazine, and there was an article in there about the parallels between Swedenborg's idea of the afterlife and the Bardo state and the movie Jacob's Ladder.
Oh.
And it was really quite a fascinating article. And again, it started to really stimulate my interest in him. And I've been approached by the Swedenborgian Society to interview on this program one of their top men, which we'll probably be doing in the next couple of months or so, because they watch this, which is quite interesting. They're aware of what we're doing on this show, Sarah, which is nice to know. And it would be quite interesting to chat with them, and maybe it would be interesting, maybe if you wanted to be involved in that interview, Gary.
Oh, well, let me know. I mean, there was a recent film, I think it's called Things Seen and Heard or something like that. It's a kind of sort of horror film on Netflix that dealt with Swedenborg. It was about a painter. I can't remember exactly what it was. A painter who had strange paintings that had some, cult kind of thing to. I think it's called Things Seen and Heard, because that's what he says. His accounts of his trips to heaven and hell. Things seen and heard. That's. I mean. I know that film. That's it's a very interesting film. And there's all, he didn't believe in reincarnation, Swedenborg. So his ideas informed a great deal of sort of spiritism in the 19th century. And there was I think it was what's his name, Kardec, who said, there is reincarnation. The spirits go and they come back. And that was like a big battle in the 19th century, whether there's reincarnation or there's not. And so, that was the thing, Madame Blavatsky. That's why she became public enemy number one with the spiritualists, because she was saying that it isn't Aunt Betty or Uncle Tom or Benjamin Franklin who you're talking to. It's these astral hobos that are hanging out at the lower level, and they're happy to talk to anybody. They'll tell you whoever you want them to be, they'll be, and they'll chat. And then she said, no, these are all astral shells. They're kind of like
the hungry ghosts.
Yeah, more or less this kind of thing. Yeah, and then and she was able to dispel them, and she was a mage. She wasn't a medium. She was a magician. She was a woman of power. Not I'm putting myself in this trance state in order for something else to take over. She commanded all this sort of thing. So,
which goes right back to the esoteric traditions. Right. Okay. I am aware of the fact that we're almost up now, and as always, this is always fascinating. Whenever we get talking, I just don't want to stop. I just don't want to stop. It just goes. It's just so fascinating. We can go into so many areas, but I'm aware of time and everybody else's time. So if everybody wants to contact you, wants to get hold of your books, anything else, your website, if you can give us the links now or tell us what.
It's just www.garylachman.co.uk. That's a sort of website blog. It's on, all the usual places you can find the books, and there's lots of videos online on YouTube, and I'm on Twitter and Facebook. So I mean, these days it's not hard to find people, so.
No. Well, Gary, I'm really keen that we need to meet up again soon. I really miss our conversations, and it would be really good to just touch base again in North London sometime to make.
Yeah, let's try to do that. Maybe all three of us can do that at some point.
It'd be wonderful, sir, if you could come in. It would be really excellent.
We could go for a walk around Hampstead Heath.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that once the weather gets a little nicer. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be really nice. Let's do that. Right. Okay. Thanks everybody for listening.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much, Gary, for being a fantastic guest. As always, thanks very much, Sarah, for your involvement and your assistance on this as well. As it's getting darker, I'm just feeling more and more like a ghost here. I think Gary's in the same position.
I am. Yeah. Right.
But anyway, so thanks everybody for listening. The next one will be the next Consciousness Hour, where I said it's going to be Colin Stanley, where we're going to be discussing the work of the great Colin Wilson, which, as Gary said, was a huge influence on him and was also a massive influence on me as well. I mean, the book The Occult was such a profound influence on me, and I try to mimic his writing style. I know, Gary, you do as well. So
just try to be readable. That's the thing with Colin. It's just like he's very aware of the reader, and I think in a way that's why, how should we say it, not taken as seriously by some consciousness studies people, because he's not difficult. He's a good writer. He gets you going and thinking. So I mean, that was the thing with me. Once I started reading, I couldn't put his books down. And even now, I obsessively reread them, and I shouldn't. It's probably an addiction. I should probably get.
Yeah, I have a similar addiction. We got a Wilson addiction. Yeah.
All right, take care, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.